a pleasure to be here and see so many of you here to talk all things pensions and investments. So, as Rhoda mentioned, I'm Charlene Young. I am from AJ Bell. I am our pensions and savings expert, but I'm not a technology expert, so I'm just going to double check that everything works quite well here. So, what we're going to talk about today. You're going to hear lots of brilliant investment presentations, but it wouldn't be a retirement money show without something on pensions, something quite close to my heart. So, 51% of people don't know how much money they'll need for a comfortable retirement. What does that even mean? And of those people who think they know how much they might need, 60% are worried they might outlive their savings. Now, what am I going to cover today to try and kind of tackle some of that in the 20 minutes or just less than 20 minutes that we have now? So, firstly, I'm going to go through kind of working out how much do you actually need? What do you need to think about? How can you put a value on that? Because we've moved from a world where perhaps our kind of income in retirement was based on a company pension scheme that paid out a proportion of our earnings when we retired. But these days, as our customers all well know, we have pension pots as well. So how do we kind of use those and get the most of those for our retirement? A really important part, how much can you actually pay in? And then finally, those kind of 5 ways to boost your savings, as we're all about kind of growth today. So how much do you need? I mean, of course, it absolutely depends. We're all individuals. We all have our own different goals, and we all have a picture of perhaps what we want our retirement to look like. It might not be completely finishing work entirely. It might be a kind of a phased retirement. But half the battle, I think, is kind of pinning down, what those goals are. You might have the kind of aspirational lifestyle goals, but, what does that look like in terms of pounds and pence? And what does it look like in terms of time frames? So if you're really stuck, I kind of always think, look at what you're spending now. And then think forwards, how much of that do you want to keep when you retire? Are some things going to fall away? So commuting costs, for example. Or, maybe more importantly, what do you want to spend more on? So does that look like kind of your holidays, your leisure activities, whatever that looks like for you? So we do have some handy figures from the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association. You may or may not have heard of them. They're called the Retirement Living Standards. They are in today's money, and they're quite handy for people who are kind of really stuck to think about, how much might it cost me to live in retirement. Now, some things I should point out about these figures. These are for a single person. I'm going to look at couples in a second. They're in today's money, okay, so they're adjusted for inflation. So if you are some way away from retirement, that 31,000 figure is going to look more when you actually get to that point. They also do not include mortgage or rental costs. So there's, like anything, quite a few assumptions behind them. But I do think they've done quite a good job to kind of really sort of pin down what different lifestyles might, of course, cost. Now, let's have a look at them for a couple. So you'll see here the minimum lifestyle. I mean, that is the basic minimum. I very much doubt it's the retirement we would all be aiming for or want. So really looking at those kind of moderate and comfortable retirement. They make all sorts of kind of assumptions about how many holidays you might want to take a year, how much you might want to spend on food, on travel and things like that. And, they aren't going to match all of our own requirements and perhaps our expectations. For instance, I'm looking at the moderate one here. I think it budgets for a very short holiday once a year, and that's not what I would like my retirement to look like. It's not what I would like to spend on holidays now. We're all different, of course, but it is a really good place to kind of think about where to start. So as you'll see for a couple here, the minimum is just over £22,000 in today's money. If we're thinking about what might fund our retirement, kind of a basic bedrock, and it's always in the news for various reasons, is of course the state pension. Now, as I say, that's a very, very minimum standard of living in retirement, and it roughly works out to 2 lots of the full new state pension. But I think, most of us in this room are going to be thinking about what moderate and comfortable looks like to us. So that's kind of what I'm going to zone in on the next slide. Excuse me. So I've got a little bit of a sore throat here. So as I talked about, we've gone from a world of talking about final guaranteed incomes. Some of you in the room might have a bedrock of a defined benefit scheme, for instance, or a final salary scheme. Oh, my slides have squashed up slightly there. That's not what I've got on the screen here. But what does it mean in terms of a pot? Okay, so these 2 figures I've taken out the state pension from that kind of income requirement, and I've turned it using, again, some broad assumptions, into kind of what pot that might look like for a couple. So there's some pretty hefty figures. It's, for that moderate lifestyle, £200,000 each in a pot on top of the state pension. And that is by the time you reach state pension age, which of course in the next few years is also going to go up. If you want to aim for that kind of comfortable retirement, that higher income figure for those couples, so for a couple that would be £59,000 together from your pots after the state pension, you're looking at, kind of £365,000 each there in pots. Now, these are the midpoints of those figures. Of course, we're looking quite far into the future. There's lots of assumptions. I've kind of picked the midpoints to kind of make it as fair as possible. And it's not designed to scare you. I know there's lots of headlines. People stand up and say, oh, no one's saving enough. No one's going to do this. In my world, that's not going to incentivize. That's not going to kind of get people engaged with their pensions and want to do something about it. That's just going to turn most people off. So, that's not to say that's guaranteed going to give you your comfortable retirement, but hopefully some figures to think about in terms of how we might get there. Right, so you're thinking about how on earth am I going to get that much in my pot? Or maybe you are almost there and you just want to kind of top your SIP or your other pension pot up in the kind of glide path to retirement. Well, there's two main levers that the government uses to monitor how much people can pay into their pensions and get the full benefit of tax relief and the things we love, those incentives to pay into your pension. First one, as I've just mentioned, is tax relief. So we're talking about personal contributions from our own money for UK residents. You can pay in up to 100% of what's called your relevant UK earnings. So the clue there is in earnings. I think sometimes this trips people up, especially if you take a lot of your income as dividends, for instance. That doesn't count as earnings for tax relief in pension contributions. So one thing to kind of watch out for. If you've got no earnings, perhaps because you earn your income, like I say, through investment income, rental income, you can still pay in up to £3,600 gross. Now that amount has stayed the same for about 20 years. It should have really gone up with inflation. It's not really gone up, with the cost of living crisis that we've all been dealing with. So, that is something we've been campaigning for the government to look at, but sort of knocking on a slightly closed door on that one, unfortunately. But that means, non-earners can have up to £2,880 paid into their pension, and that's topped up by tax relief to that £3,600 gross. Why am I mentioning that? Well, if you have maxed out your own allowances, it can be really useful if you wanted to pay into a pension for a non-earner, a spouse or a child, or even a grandchild, actually. So that's kind of where that amount comes from. Maybe one day we'll see it go up. Now, the second lever is the annual allowance. Now, this is £60,000 a year for most people, and it is a general allowance covering all of your pension pots, all of your pension contributions made by you, tax relief top-ups from the government, and anything paid in by your employer. So that's what counts towards that £60,000. It can be different, it can be lower if you've got a very high income, it starts to get tapered down, or if you've already accessed your pension and taken what's called a flexible income. So for our kind of SIP customers in the room, if you've accessed your pension, you've started taking drawdown income, chances are your annual allowance will be lower than that £60,000. Now, I could spend all day talking about this. I could do my whole session on how much you can pay in and different strategies, but if you want to know a bit more and how that applies to you, I've done this article on our website. So if you just search for contributing up in this corner, that should come up there, or if you search for my name, it should bring up kind of all the content I've written. And it goes through kind of all the different bits, if you're self-employed, perhaps, how that might change for you, and all the kind of ifs, whats, and buts that go along with that. That was just a very quick recap to kind of get us into our scene of how we can boost our pensions. Excuse me. So, how can you make the most of what you can save? We've talked about the maximum you can put in. We've talked about what you might need in the pot. How can we get close to that comfortable retirement? So first up, one for employees here, check in with your workplace scheme. So auto-enrollment has done it's done wonders for getting people starting to save, for getting people into pensions, whereas before it probably would have been easily forgotten when you start a new job. However, thanks to auto-enrollment and thanks to the fact, workplaces are changing, we change jobs. I think the latest figures are the government estimates that, we'll have between 10 and 11 different jobs in our lifetime, certainly someone my age, and that could potentially mean now 10 different pension pots. So check in with your workplace scheme. Find out about matched contributions. Now, there are, with auto-enrolment, minimums that employers must pay in and we must pay in as employees. However, lots of employers will actually pay more than that minimum, provided in a lot of cases that you would match it as well. So, you might actually find that it goes up to nearly 10%. If you were able to pay in 10%, your employer might match that as well. So it's worth finding out, don't just stick to the minimums, or if you've got family members who are just starting a new job, maybe not the most exciting thing to talk about, pensions. I love it, obviously, but it's definitely something to think about. And second off, although kind of how much you pay in, how much time you've got are the really big factors in, how you can really make the most of a pension pot. Your investment choice, of course, influences how much you're going to get out at the end. That's what we're all here to talk about for the remainder of the day. So in auto-enrolment schemes, you'll be enrolled into the default if you don't pick a different option. So they do get people invested, and that's great. There is a charge cap, which is great. 0.75% overall. You might have a view on whether that is good value or not, but they aren't designed for an individual, their goals or their time frame. So whilst they get a lot of people invested, at the very least, just have a look at the options there. Have a look at what you've got in your default. Check you're happy with it. Check it kind of matches your attitude to risk, your time frames, and your goals, especially if you kind of have a long time frame to retirement. Second, it's really obvious, isn't it? I didn't want to just stand up here and be like, you want more in your pension? You have to pay in more. It's quite obvious, but let's kind of squeeze the most as we can out of what you're able to pay in. Okay, so first up, something that I think will probably become even more prevalent than it is already, thanks to the kind of hikes of employer national insurance in the budget that we've seen. So salary sacrifice, if you think about your workplace scheme, speak to your employer. You might be able to come to a formal arrangement where you exchange some of your salary in order to make more of a pension contribution. Now, that's good because it saves you tax, it saves you national insurance, it saves your employer national insurance, and they might pay all or some of that saving into your pension as well. So definitely worth a conversation. However, obviously, just be careful. It is a formal arrangement. You are effectively reducing your income. So if you're at the stage where you're thinking about perhaps borrowing some money or some more money to fund a house purchase or remortgage, just think about that. You can generally only alter them once a year. Like I say, might become more popular. Employers might become even more receptive to it because of those national insurance increases. Now, the second one, divert extra cash. So this could be anything from a regular bill that you've got coming to an end, something you're not going to kind of miss. If you can divert that into your pension as an extra amount, those, especially over long time frames, those amounts can really kind of add up. So here, sorry if you can't see this, but I think you will get the slides, an extra £100 per month, so £80 plus that little tax relief top up, for 20 years could add £43,000 to your pot. If we're extending that to 30 years, that amount is closer to £88,000. So, that's nearly half of that kind of 200 grand pot. Right, number 3, don't miss out on tax relief. So, touched on this earlier in terms of the limits of how much you can pay in and get the full benefit of that tax relief. Check in with the type of pension you're saving in. So a SIP, our SIP customers will be familiar, hopefully, with the fact it's called a relief at source scheme. A kind of jargon term, but important for this. A workplace scheme might be net pay, so where the money is taken from your salary before you pay tax and national insurance. If you're in a scheme like that, and you're sticking with that, maybe don't worry about this too much, but if you're paying into something like a SIP or a personal pension from money that you've already paid tax on, chances are you're going to be in a relief at source scheme. Now, how do these operate? So 20% basic rate tax relief, that top-up is automatically added. We, as your pension provider, will reclaim that for you and add it to the SIP in a few weeks' time after the contribution. So that means if someone pays in £10,000 of their own money, the basic rate tax relief is £2,500. The total in the pension is £12,500. However, sometimes people miss out on the fact that if you're a higher rate taxpayer or an additional rate taxpayer on your earnings, 40% or 45%, you can claim more tax relief back. You have to do this directly from the taxman. It doesn't go into your pension, but it does lower your overall tax bill and the cost of getting that £12,500 in your pension. So my high rate taxpayer, he or she pays in £10,000. AJ Bell will reclaim the 2.5. He or she can reclaim an extra £2,500 off their tax bill for the year. So that lowers the cost of getting that £12,500 in the pension scheme. If they pay tax at 45%, the potential additional relief is even more. So, again, this is about kind of squeezing the most out of what we're paying into our pensions, and you can actually also backdate this. If you've missed doing it, you can't backdate the actual money you're paying in, but you can backdate a tax relief claim. So either go to HMRC direct. I'm reluctant to say ring them because that will cost quite a lot of your time, but if you fill in a self-assessment tax return, you can adjust that for the year. Just get in touch with HMRC and make sure you're claiming everything that you are entitled to. Oh, look, that's just like a nice little jazzy emphasis there. Right, number 4. Just have a quick check on where I am for time. I'm good. I think I've got just over 5 minutes left. So, as I mentioned before, the average person now is likely to have 10 or 11 different jobs over their lifetime, potentially lots of pension pots. Now, Roland touched on it earlier. We do have a pension finding service. Providers can help, and I'll come on to kind of how you can track down lost pensions in a moment. And actually, even if they're not lost, you kind of know they're with XYZ company here, that one's there, oh, that's from when I worked here. Check in with them, see how they're doing, see those investment choices. Most of all, look at the cost. Okay, so the beauty of kind of combining pensions, whether they were lost or not before, is that you might have the option to put them into a single account that costs less overall and obviously costs less of your time. We all know and love those big pension statements. If you want to kind of spend a lot of time going through them and looking through it, that's absolutely fine. But combining pensions is key if you really kind of want to be in the driving seat and kind of engage back with those pots however and whenever you built them up. It's easier to see if you're on track versus your goals. Going back to that kind of first bit of my presentation, it might be easier to see how far you are away from those pots or that final kind of target retirement income. And as I say, you could also pay less in charges over time. Depends on which company you are with, of course. Again, reducing charges, even just by a small amount, can really, really add up over time. So if you can shave off 0.75% a year off of your charges, and that is possible, there are contracts out there that have horrendous charges. You could boost your pension pot by £7,000 over 10 years just by moving it, just by reducing those charges you're paying, or extend that to 20 years, and it's £20,000. Now, how on earth do you track down your lost pensions without getting kind of lost in the filing cabinet? I should point out the government has a service to do that called the Pension Tracing Service. However, we also have a service, as Roland mentioned. We have got a free pension finding service, and you can also choose to then wrap those pensions up in one pension pot and with one single all-in charge. So if you think, oh, I've just had enough of this, I can't deal with it, it's too much, have a look into our ready-made pension service. If the ready-made pension itself isn't for you, have a look at the pension finding service. You can actually also use that in conjunction with your SIP if you've already got a SIP set up and you're happy kind of managing that. But again, friends and family members, if it's something you think might be applicable to them, there are services from providers out there. And finally, hopefully, you go away today, you're paying in more, or you already are paying in, and you're confident about getting that retirement that you want and deserve. Think about regular investing. Don't forget to actually invest that extra money that you're paying in. Don't let it sit there languishing in cash. Okay, so most providers, including ourselves, we offer an automated investing service. Again, it's all about kind of time in the market, not timing the market. So takes that out of your hands, same day every month, kind of working days here or there aside, you'll get that amount invested. You can set it up yourself. You can choose the investments you're going into. Usually, it's lower dealing charges, certainly is with AJ Bell. And again, with us, you can get started on that from just £25 a month. So again, it's all about kind of making the most of that money you're paying in. Don't just leave it sat there in cash. Another shout out for our ready-made pension. Anything you do pay into that, any cash you pay in, the tax relief that comes in from the government, and any transfers that you make in cash, they get automatically invested into your chosen investment fund. Of course, it's a much narrower range of investment options, but that's right for some people, and some people are more comfortable with that. And we're taking down that barrier and making sure those people are actually getting that cash invested. Okay, So with 1 minute to go, I'm on time, thank goodness. Trains today almost made me miss this. It's taken me about 5 hours to get here. But all that leaves me to say is thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of the day.